Right now, as you are watching this, extreme heat warnings are stretched across Arizona, Nevada, California, and Utah. And two cities just broke temperature records that had stood since before most of our grandparents were born. Reno hit 103 degrees on August 7th, breaking a record from 1990. Salt Lake City hit that same 103 degrees, breaking a record that had stood since 1874. The National Weather Service's own heat risk mapping shows widespread, major to extreme heat risk stretching across the entire desert Southwest through this weekend. But here's the part almost nobody covering this weekend's heat is mentioning. This is not this year's first Southwest heat wave, or its second, or even its third. This is at least the fifth distinct heat event to hammer this same region since March. And when you actually line those events up side by side, they stop looking like a string of coincidences and start looking like something else entirely. This is the story of why the Southwest has now spent this entire year running hotter, earlier, and longer than at almost any point in the historical record. And what the data says is actually driving it. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the numbers show. Drop a comment and tell me if you're in the Southwest right now and how this heat has actually felt where you live. I read every one of these. If you want grounded, sourced weather coverage instead of panic headlines, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need to see it before the next wave hits. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. To understand why this weekend's heat matters, you have to go back to how early this year's pattern actually started. On May 8th, Phoenix reached 115 degrees, the earliest that city had ever recorded a reading that high in its entire history, beating the previous earliest mark by nearly 3 weeks. Palm Springs hit 118 degrees the very next day. Las Vegas broke its own earliest ever one, 110-degree record around the same stretch. That came on the heels of a late March heat wave that had already rewritten state and national heat records across the West before spring had even properly begun. By late June, a second wave pushed Phoenix and Palm Springs back above 100 degrees and sent Las Vegas to its first 100-degree reading of the year, with meteorologists noting that temperatures were jumping 20 to 30 degrees in just a few days. Enough, in the words of AccuWeather senior meteorologist Tyler Royes, to catch people off guard. Then came July, which by its own accounting became the hottest year to date on record in more than 24 cities stretching from Texas to Arizona, Nevada, and the Northern Rockies, according to the Southeast Regional Climate Center, a list that includes Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City all at once. Phoenix logged 12 separate days at or above 110 degrees that month. Las Vegas was not far behind, with 10. Even Los Angeles saw 9. Days at or above 90 degrees in July, well outside its usual coastal moderation. Now, in the first full week of August, a fifth wave has arrived, and forecasters describe it as a double-peaked event, meaning it is not one heat dome that builds and breaks, but a ridge of high pressure strong enough to produce two separate surges back-to-back. The first peak hit hardest across southern California, southern Arizona, and southern Nevada, with record highs likely in places like Death Valley. Meteorologist Daniel Swain, who tracks Western weather patterns closely, said the ridge was expected to expand further out into the Pacific during this stretch, raising the real possibility that temperatures could overperform even the already elevated forecasts. Along the immediate California coast, unusually warm ocean water is limiting how much relief even nighttime brings, since the ocean itself is not cooling down the way it normally would overnight. As of this weekend, the Weather Prediction Center's own forecast discussion said extreme heat across the Southwest could top 120 degrees, with morning lows in Las Vegas and Phoenix only dropping into the 90s, offering almost no overnight recovery at all. In Maricopa County, home to Phoenix, officials have directed residents to call the local 211 line for information on free cooling centers, transportation, and water assistance. Wildfire smoke is now compounding the problem in parts of the interior Northwest, with the National Weather Service office in Boise reporting hot conditions, layered on top of poor air quality from active fires, and red flag warnings covering areas where low humidity and gusty wind could let new fires spread quickly. So why does this keep happening, wave after wave, in the same region, for months on end? Part of the answer is atmospheric and mechanical. Each of these events has been driven by the same basic setup, a strong ridge of high pressure building over the west that traps hot air underneath it and blocks the kind of storm systems that would normally move through and cool things down. But the biggie, and more important answer, this year is the ocean itself. In mid-July, the weekly sea surface temperature anomaly in the Niño 3.4 region of the Pacific, the patch of ocean climatologists watch most closely to track El Niño, reached about 1.3 degrees Celsius above normal, consistent with what forecasters classify as a moderate El Niño that is expected to keep strengthening into what some models now describe as a potential super El Niño. El Niño typically has a weaker and less predictable effect on American summer weather than it does in winter, but climate researchers tracking this specific event have pointed out that tropical Pacific convection this year appears strong enough to launch what are called Rossby waves into the mid-latitudes, essentially exporting unusual warmth and pressure patterns far outside the tropics themselves. That is part of why this year's heat has shown up almost everywhere across the west, south, and east at different points, rather than staying contained to one region the way a typical single-season heat wave would. There is one more piece of this that matters specifically for the Southwest, and it is the part that should genuinely worry anyone living there. In a normal year, the North American monsoon arrives by mid to late summer and brings regular afternoon thunderstorms that break up exactly this kind of prolonged heat. But a developing super El Niño tends to delay that monsoon, reducing the very thunderstorm relief the region depends on to reset between heat waves. That is a meaningful part of why this year's pattern has felt less like a heat wave and more like a heat season, one event rolling directly into the next, with less of the normal seasonal relief in between. NOAA's own outlook for the rest of August reflects that same tension. Forecasters are calling for hot, dry conditions to dominate the southeast, while the interior southwest itself actually sits in what NOAA calls equal chances territory, meaning competing signals. Cooler historical analog years, pulling one direction, and warmer model guidance pulling the other, are essentially canceling each other out in the official temperature outlook. At the same time, NOAA's precipitation outlook favors a wetter than normal monsoon across the Great Basin, the Southwest, and the Rockies specifically, which, if it verifies, could finally offer the kind of periodic relief this region has been largely missing so far this year. It is worth being direct about what all of this has actually cost, because the numbers behind a headline like this one are not abstract. Heat remains the deadliest weather hazard in the United States in an average year, killing more people than hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods combined, according to National Weather Service data. The 2023 Southwest heat wave, which held Phoenix above 110 degrees for 31 consecutive days, killed 645 people in Maricopa County alone, according to the county's own medical examiner records, making it one of the deadliest heat events in modern American history in a single county. This year's pattern has already run longer and touched more states than that one did, even if no single stretch has yet matched its exact death toll. The people who bear the brunt of it are consistently the same groups: outdoor workers, older adults, people experiencing homelessness, and anyone without reliable access to air conditioning, especially during stretches like this weekend's, when overnight lows barely dip out of the 90s and the body never actually gets a real chance to recover before the next day's heat begins building again. So where does this go from here? Based on the current forecast, this weekend's peak should ease modestly by early next week as the first surge of this double-peaked ridge weakens. But meteorologists tracking the pattern have already flagged a second surge. Building behind it, with extreme ridging and potentially intense heat expected to return by the middle of next week and persist for some time after that. Given that this would be the sixth distinct heat wave to hit the Southwest since March, and given that the Super El Niño driving the broader pattern is expected to keep strengthening rather than fade, there's little in the current data to suggest the region is close to a real, sustained break. The most realistic hope for relief lies in that wetter than normal monsoon NOAA is forecasting for later in August. And even that comes with real risk of its own, since a monsoon arriving on top of ground this parched and heat-baked tends to produce sudden, dangerous flash flooding rather than gentle relief. The honest, grounded summary is this. Since March, the American Southwest has been hit by roughly 5 separate major heat waves, starting with a record-rewriting event in early spring, then Phoenix's earliest ever 115-degree reading in May, jarring 20 to 30 degree swing in June, the hottest year-to-date on record in more than 24 cities through July, and now a double-peaked ridge this weekend that has already broken century-old temperature records in Reno and Salt Lake City. The common thread running underneath every one of those events is a developing super El Niño that is both amplifying the heat itself and delaying the monsoon relief the region normally depends on. That is why this is not just one more heat wave to get through. It is a pattern, and based on what forecasters are currently seeing, build for the middle of next week. It is not finished yet. We are going to keep tracking this the way we did today, straight from National Weather Service heat risk data, NOAA's monthly outlooks, and the meteorologists actually watching this ridge in real time, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss the next wave, because based on everything we just walked through, there is likely another one coming. And leave that comment below. Tell me how this year's heat has compared to past summers where you live, and if you are anywhere in the Southwest this weekend, take the warning seriously, check on anyone older or without air conditioning near you, and avoid the peak afternoon hours outdoors if you possibly can. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.